Montana Territory, spring of 1877. The wind off the Bitterroot Mountains carried the scent of pine and smoke, and the sky over Ravalli County bled soft gold as the sun lowered against the peaks. Nella Vance had not slept in 3 nights. She gripped the reins of the tired mule pulling her wagon, her hands raw despite the gloves. Her dress was torn near the hem, her shawl clung to her shoulders, and her eyes wide, watching, waiting, never stopped flicking toward the trees. She was alone, utterly alone. Until a rider crested the ridge. He came slow and steady, his horse thick with dust and muscle, his hat shadowing his face. The rifle across his saddle wasn't raised, and when he spotted her wagon, he pulled the reins and stopped a good 10 steps away. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep calm, but there was steel in it too. Nella's throat caught. She stood up in the wagon bed, her voice trembling. "Please, please do not come any closer." He didn't. He dismounted instead, holding his hands up, palms out. "Name's Weston Grady. I work cattle over at the Odell spread, 3 miles east. Just saw your wagon, figured you might need help." Nella stared at him, her shoulders stiff as wire. "I do not need a man's help." But her voice cracked, and the tears she'd been holding back threatened to spill. Weston tilted his head, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "You got blood on your dress." She looked down. The dried stain near her hip had stiffened into the fabric. "It is not mine," she said quietly. "It is my brother's." He took a careful step closer. "Where is he now?" Nella didn't answer. She just sank down onto the bench, her arms hugging her chest, and for the first time since leaving the wrecked homestead, she let the tears come. She didn't sob, didn't wail. She just wept quietly, shoulders trembling. Weston tied his horse and approached slow, like a man who knew what it meant to survive storms. He stood by the wagon, not touching, just waiting. "My brother," she whispered. "They came 3 nights ago, took the horses, shot him in front of me, said they would come back for me. I waited until morning, buried him, then I left." Weston's jaw clenched. "How far you think they are behind you, I do not know, but I have not slept. I keep hearing them." He looked up at the sky, then at her again. "You cannot keep driving blind. This road forks in 2 miles. You take the wrong one, you end up in canyon country. That wagon will not make it." "I will not go back," she said. "I am not asking you to." He reached into his saddlebag and drew out a flask of water, then passed it up to her. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his. They were warm and calloused, steady. "I have a cabin," he said after a beat. "Small but dry. You stay tonight. I will ride out tomorrow and track whoever did this." She shook her head. "They were drunk, wild. I do not remember faces, just firelight and shouting. I do not need faces to follow footprints." She stared at him, then down at the reins in her lap. "Why would you do that for me?" Weston tipped his hat back. "Because I have seen what men like that do when they think no one is looking. And because no woman should run herself into the ground trying to outrun ghosts." Something in her face cracked. She nodded once. "All right." He helped her down from the wagon, not saying a word when her hand clutched his forearm harder than it needed to. She kept glancing behind them as they walked, but Weston never let his hand drift far from the pistol on his hip. The ride to his cabin took 20 minutes. She rode in the wagon, and he led her mule while keeping his horse close. The cabin sat at the edge of a tree line, tucked between rock and pine. Modest, clean. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside it was warm. Weston lit a lantern while she stood stiffly near the door, unsure whether to sit or speak. "You are safe now," he said gently, setting a tin cup of coffee on the table for her. "You want to talk, I am here. You want to sit quiet, that is fine too." Nella sat. Night fell hard outside, the kind that swallowed the world whole. Weston took the cot near the hearth, giving her the bed in the back room. But when the wind kicked up and a tree branch scraped the window, she bolted upright, heart pounding. Weston was already there. He had left his boots by the fire but came quick and quiet. She stood in the doorway, shaking. "I heard them," she whispered. "I swear I heard them out there." He stepped forward and wrapped both arms around her before she could pull away. His chest was solid, warm, and for the first time in days she felt still. "You are safe," he said into her hair. "You will never face another night alone again." Her hands clutched the back of his shirt, holding tighter than she meant to. He did not let go, not for a long time, and when she finally looked up at him, tears streaking her cheeks, something in his gaze changed. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, gentle as rain. "I am not going anywhere, Nella." She stared at him, breath caught in her throat. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," and she believed him. The rooster crowed once, then again, but Nella had already been watching the line of light creep along the wooden floorboards for some time. She hadn't closed her eyes, though the bed had been soft enough and the walls thick enough to muffle the wind. Sleep didn't come easy when your bones still remembered the sound of a gunshot. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders, and padded barefoot to the door. Weston was outside, chopping wood with a steady rhythm, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, breath misting in the cool morning air. He didn't glance her way when she stepped out. He simply split another log, then leaned the axe against the stump. "Coffee's on the stove," he said without turning, wiping his hands on a rag. "I figured you'd be up early." "I didn't want to be," she admitted, her voice rasped from disuse. "But my mind has its own way." He nodded once, then bent to stack the split logs. "You'll get your footing back, not all at once, but it'll happen." She stood quiet for a time, watching the steam rise from the kettle through the open door. "I never learned to shoot," she said finally. Weston straightened. "You want to?" "I don't want to be helpless again. My brother—" She stopped herself. The whole of it didn't need saying. Weston's eyes found hers and he didn't ask for more. "All right. We'll start after breakfast." She nodded, then stepped inside to pour the coffee, wrapping her hands around the tin cup as if it could hold her steady. Later, he laid out a small Colt revolver on a flat stone near the tree line. "This one's light enough to handle. You'll learn to clean it too, but first, we'll get your grip right." He showed her with quiet patience how to square her shoulders, how to breathe steady, how not to flinch at the sound. The first shot went wide, the second closer. By the fifth, she'd found her line. Weston gave a single nod. "You've got a good eye." Nella didn't smile, but her shoulders eased. They spent the rest of the morning working in silence, mending the fence along the east side of the pasture. She'd insisted on helping, tying her hair back with a strip of muslin and rolling her sleeves to the elbow. She worked with a quiet focus, hands blistered but steady, never asking to stop. By midday, Weston handed her a tin plate with beans and cornbread, and they sat beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. "You always live alone?" she asked, glancing sideways at him. "Since I left Arkansas." "Had sisters there. One died in childbirth, the other married and moved east. I came west looking for space to breathe." "Did you find it?" "More or less. Then you came down that ridge and the world changed shape again." She looked away, unsure how to answer that. "Not saying it like a burden," he added, softer this time. "Just truth. You're here now." A wind moved through the trees, and she watched the leaves shift, the light dappling across his face. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. You don't need to know today." She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the tin plate. "I haven't done anything without someone needing me to. First Pa, then Nathan. I cooked, I cleaned, I kept books when we had a store. But I never made choices for myself." Weston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You chose to bury your brother. You chose to leave. You chose to walk into the unknown. That's more than most." She met his eyes, and for the first time, there was no fear in hers, just weariness and something quieter beneath it. Gratitude, maybe, or the beginning of trust. That night, after the fire dimmed and the animals quieted, she stood in the doorway of the main room, holding her shawl closed around her. "Would it trouble you if I sat by the fire a while?" she asked. Weston stirred from his cot. "Not at all." She lowered herself onto the hearthstone, drawing her knees to her chest. He didn't press her with questions, just sat across from her, his hands resting on his thighs, watching the flicker of flame. "I had a dream," she said eventually. "I was back in the wagon, but it wasn't moving. Everything was still and Nathan was there, but he wouldn't speak. He kept looking at the sky like he saw something I couldn't." "I've had dreams like that," Weston said, "where it feels like they're trying to tell you something, but the words won't come." She drew in a slow breath. "I think he was telling me to keep going, not to stop in that fear." "You're already doing that." She looked into the firelight, her voice barely above a whisper. "You meant it, didn't you, what you said last night?" He didn't hesitate. "Every word." She nodded once, then stood. Her hand reached toward him, not quite asking, not quite certain, and he rose to meet it. His fingers closed around hers, firm and gentle. "I don't know what comes next," she said again. He stepped close, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "Then we find out together." And for the first time since the world fell apart, she closed her eyes and felt the ground hold steady beneath her. The creek had swelled overnight, fed by snowmelt from higher up the slope. Weston watched the current tug pine needles downstream while Nella stood beside him, sleeves rolled, a tin pail in hand. She moved carefully over the slick stones, face pinched in concentration. "Step where I do," Weston said, guiding her across. "That flat one there, it'll hold." She followed, her boots finding the marks he left behind. When she reached the far side, she looked back at the small cabin tucked against the trees, its smoke curling lazily through the clearing. It felt further away than it had minutes ago, like she'd crossed into something else entirely. Weston took the pail from her and dipped it low, letting the water rush in clean. "There's trout in this bend if you wait long enough." "I never fished," she said, brushing damp hair from her cheek. "Nathan did. Said I didn't have the patience." Weston glanced up at her, sunlight catching the edge of his jaw. "You strike me as someone with more patience than most." She didn't answer, just crouched to run her fingers through the cold water. The silence between them was easy now, no longer brittle. After a while, she stood and dusted her hands on her skirt. "What made you stop ranching full time?" she asked as they walked back. "Cattle need land," he said. "And land draws neighbors, fences, disputes. I never wanted to fight over dirt. So I carved out what I needed and let the rest be. Doesn't it get quiet out here?" "Sometimes," he said. "But quiet lets a man hear himself think." "I'd rather that than noise I can't trust." Back by the cabin, she hung the washed linens over a line while Weston tended the mares whose she'd picked up a stone during the fence work. Nella watched the way his hands moved, sure and unhurried. Every task he did, he gave it the time it asked for. When he rose, wiping sweat from his brow, she offered him a cup of cool water. He drank, then passed it back, his eyes soft on hers. "You worry less with your shoulders now," he said. "I'm still afraid," she said, voice even. "Just not all the time." "That's enough." They worked until the sun tipped westward. Nella stacked the last of the dried kindling beneath the porch while Weston checked the traps he'd set farther up the ridge. He returned before dark with 2 rabbits, which he cleaned and dressed behind the cabin. Nella didn't look away this time. When they sat down to eat, her fingers brushed his as he passed her a piece of bread. They lingered a moment longer than needed. "I used to think no man could be gentle," she said quietly. Weston didn't look away. "And now I'm still learning." "That's fair." Later, as dusk settled and the fire crackled low, Weston stepped outside to check the latch on the shed. Nella followed, her shawl drawn close against the chill. He turned when he heard her boots on the porch. "Sky's clearing," he said, nodding upward. "You can see the Scorpius line just there." She tilted her head, eyes squinting. "I never knew the stars by name." "My father did," he said. "Used to say they were markers left by those who came before." "You believe that?" "I believe in what stays with us, whether we ask it to or not." She stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't stopped your horse that day," she said. "I do," Weston said. "You'd have kept going, found your way, but I'm glad I saw you first." She turned toward him then, her face unreadable in the dark. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You're not. I might be slow at learning peace. I've got time." She stepped closer, her hand finding his. This time he didn't wait. He brought her hand to his chest, resting it over his heart. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You won't be again." Nella pressed her forehead to his collarbone, her breath warm against his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady as she trembled, not with fear this time, but with the slow, aching relief of being seen and safe and wanted. And Weston held her through it all, saying nothing more. He didn't need to. The first hard frost of the season came 2 weeks after Nella arrived at the cabin. It crusted the grass silver and turned the creek's edge brittle before the sun had time to rise and soften it. Weston had already laid in firewood and sealed the windows with tarred canvas, but the cold still crept in under the door. He didn't mention it aloud, but Nella had seen him rubbing his shoulder at night where the old break he never spoke of must have caught the weather. That morning, she rose early and pulled on her boots without waking him. She'd been stitching a new lining into his coat by lantern light after he'd gone to bed, using wool from the bolts she found in the chest he kept under the cot. Now she draped it over the back of the chair by the fire, the needle still caught in the last seam. Weston stepped out of the back room, blinking against the light. "You're up early." "I needed to finish something." He took one glance at the coat and stopped. "You did that for me," she nodded. "You've done more for me than I know how to repay. You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He crossed the room and picked up the coat, running his thumb over the stitching. "This'll keep the ache out of my bones." That was the idea. They left the cabin not long after, heading west along the ridge to check the trap line. Nella carried the rifle now, slung across her back the way Weston had shown her. Her steps were steady, her breath clouding in the air. She didn't flinch when the wind snapped through the trees. "Smells like snow," he said, pausing beside a stand of juniper. She tilted her face into the wind. "Do you mind it?" "I don't mind quiet seasons. Gives a man room to think." She watched him a moment, then asked, "What do you think about?" He didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I think about my sister's boy," he said eventually. "He'd be grown by now. I wonder if he ever found a trade worth keeping." Nella looked ahead, eyes soft. "I used to wonder if I'd make it past 25. I was always so certain I'd be left behind." "You weren't," he said. "No," she agreed. "I wasn't." By noon, they'd gathered 2 hares and a fox Weston decided to tan for its hide. On the walk back, they moved in comfortable silence, their arms brushing now and then when the trail narrowed. Weston didn't pull away. Neither did she. Later, inside the cabin, as the sky bruised with evening, Weston laid out the map he kept folded in the drawer beneath the hearth. Nella leaned over his shoulder, her braids slipping forward to brush his sleeve. "There's a plot of land here," he said, pointing to a small bend in the valley. "Flat enough for planting. Creek runs close and the soil's good. What about it? If we built something there, we wouldn't have to winter in this old place again. Could raise chickens, maybe a milk cow." She studied the spot, then looked at him. You want to leave this cabin? I'd leave anything if it meant building something with you. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You're sure? I haven't been unsure since the day you climbed down from that wagon. She pressed her palm to the map, just beside his. Then let's plant something that lasts. That night, she didn't return to the back room. She stayed by the fire after the dishes were cleaned, and when Weston rose to bank the coals, he paused beside her. You want me to take the cot? No, she said, without hesitation. I want you to stay. He watched her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across his face. Then he sat beside her and she reached for his hand. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the warmth held. And in the quiet space between past and future, two people who'd weathered more than most leaned into something they could trust. The slow, unshakable beginning of home. By mid-December, the snows had come steady, and the cabin walls no longer felt like a place to wait out trouble, but something earned, planked with care and stitched with shared labor. Nella stood by the hearth, brushing flour from her hands as Weston entered with his coat dusted white and a branch of winter berries in one gloved hand. Found these near the draw south of the ridge, he said, setting them gently on the table. Figured you'd want something with color. She touched the sprigs with a quiet smile. They'll look well in the jar by the window. He unwrapped his scarf and hung it near the stove. Fence held. Nothing wandered too far. They've settled since we moved the trough closer, she said. I think they know this place is theirs now. Weston nodded. Like we do. They worked in tandem through the afternoon, Nella rolling dough for dumplings while Weston ground dried herbs for the stew. The rhythm of the day moved around them, unforced. He didn't need to ask where the salt was kept, and she didn't need to remind him how long the kettle took to boil. They'd found each other's habits like stones shaping to the river. After the meal, Weston stepped outside to check the smokehouse. When he returned, Nella was sitting with fabric stretched across her lap, needle catching the lamplight. She looked up as he entered, her eyes soft. You're mending again, he said. It's not mending, she replied. I'm making something. She turned the fabric toward him, a small shirt, not yet finished, with seams traced in careful stitches. He froze. Are you certain? She laid the cloth aside and rose, her hand settling over his. I am. His breath left him in a quiet rush, and then he drew her close, his arms wrapping around her like he meant to keep her from every sharp thing the world might still hold. You've given me more than I ever thought to have, he said, voice roughened by feeling. No, she whispered against his shoulder. We gave it to each other. They lay together that night without words. The silence between them was full of breath and warmth and the steady drum of two hearts that had learned how to beat side by side. The wind hissed low against the logs, but inside, the peace held. In the weeks that followed, they began drawing plans for the new home. Not grand, but wide enough for three, with a porch that faced the sunrise. Weston carved the doorframe himself, steady and deliberate, while Nella plotted out the kitchen space with chalk on the floorboards. They moved slow, the way winter asks of people, but never idle. One afternoon, as thaw began to creep into the edges of March, Weston stepped into the barn to find Nella humming softly as she brushed the mare's coat. She turned toward him, cheeks pinked from the cold, and he watched her for a moment before speaking. I've been thinking, he said. We've built everything side by side since the day we met. I'd like to make that official. She tilted her head. What would that look like? I was hoping you'd marry me. She didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He stepped forward and took both her hands. I'll ask the circuit rider when he comes through with supplies. I'd like that, she said. And I'll wear blue. That's what my mother wore. They wed 3 weeks later in the clearing behind the cabin, with pine boughs tied along the fence posts and snow still clinging to the shaded roots. The circuit rider spoke plain and true, and Weston held her hands as if they were the only compass he'd ever need. After, they shared bread and honey with the Odells and 2 of the neighboring families who'd come to witness. No fiddle, no dancing but laughter and the warmth of hands clasped in quiet celebration. Spring came slow, but it came. The new cabin went up before the summer rains, each board nailed with care, the roof laid solid beneath Weston's steady hands. Nella planted beans and sweet onion in the tilled bed behind the porch, moving slower now, her belly full with new life. Weston built her a bench beneath the cottonwoods where she could rest in the shade, and every evening they sat hand in hand and watched the sun leave gold on the hills. When the baby came, it was near midnight. Weston stayed close, holding water to her lips and whispering steady encouragement. Their son arrived red-faced and wailing, and Nella, exhausted and radiant, pressed him to her chest. "He's strong," Weston said, brushing damp hair from her brow. "He has your eyes," she replied. They named him Elias. Years passed. The orchard took root. Chickens pecked near the coop. Elias learned to walk with a grip on Weston's thumb and to laugh with his head thrown back like Nella's. In the evenings, they read by firelight, and in the mornings, Nella taught Elias his letters while Weston repaired harness or trimmed the fruit trees. They never spoke much of the years before, not because they forgot, but because they'd built something sturdier than memory. They had each other, and that was enough. And so the days turned, slow and sure, beneath the wide Montana sky. A woman who'd once fled with nothing but grief now stood in her own doorway, her child in her arms, the man she loved at her side. And the land, quiet and constant, held them all.